Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. It's your host, Sarah, and we are in our first episode of 2025. I cannot believe it. I mean, I can because I know that time goes fast, right? But also, 2025, that's pretty gnarly. I just want to say, I kind of think of the new year as like a birthday, like another year around the sun, that whole saying. Not because I'm crazy excited, but because I'm proud to have made it another year. And I'm proud for everyone with BPD who's made it another year. And I'm grateful to be, here with you all. So if you are listening, you probably have borderline or you are the loved one of someone with borderline, because honestly, who's going to find this podcast if that's not a thing in your life? Be proud of yourself. Be proud of the people that you love with BPD. It's a really fucking hard life, you guys. But we're here doing it. So, first episode of the new year, I'm really excited. Many, many moons ago, Leslie joined the podcast a couple times, I think. And we spoke back in the day about kind of like how polyamory and non-monogamy can be really beneficial when you live with borderline personality disorder. And fast forward a couple years, Leslie is back. She is going to be the first guest co-host, where the episode really is not focused on what's up in, her life and her journey, but rather kind of giving a perspective about this thing that occurs when you have borderline. Today's episode is all about self-sabotage and the way in which we, as people with borderline, can struggle with self-sabotage and have our relationships be negatively impacted and all of those things. So that's going to be a super fun discussion. I loved it. But if you do in fact want to know what's been up with Leslie, there is like a 15-minute extended version of this episode on Patreon. Leslie fills us in on her transition to her new job, especially, and like the difficulty starting a new job in terms of like social relationships and anxiety, social phobia, those kinds of things when you experience borderline. So head over there if you are interested in hearing what's going on with Leslie in that area of her life. But otherwise, let's get into the episode.
Okay, let's transition to our topic because I think this is an important topic. So, this is the first kind of like co-hosting for the podcast that I have opened up. And I was telling Leslie she's the perfect person to do this with because this is like more theoretical in nature, just kind of like more dialogue, less examples, I think. But the first topic is self-sabotage. And we know it happens. Leslie's putting her hand over her face. We know it happens. We know it happens very differently for all of us with borderline. But I would say that if you haven't engaged in some form of self-sabotage, you're probably misdiagnosed because this is a big part of the borderline experience. So, Leslie, how would you define self-sabotage?
Yeah, this is an excellent topic. And I like the way that you put it, that everybody experiences it differently. My definition of self-sabotage is probably going to be a little different than like what you would sort of standard here. Because I very much look at it as their self-sabotage is basically any skill, because technically it is a skill. It's a behavior that you learned and you've practiced it, usually most of us very well, or a coping skill of some kind that you have gathered along the way, that prevents you from living, your life worth living, if you want to use DBT language for it, but whatever, so if it is stopping you from goals, the sort of trajectory that you see for your life, and I think that it's just with self-sabotage, it's really, really important to look at what situation you might have been in the past where that skill did serve you. because these things, it's not like I'm an adult and I just started to procrastinate. That tendency is like way, way back. That's deep, that's not just something that I decided to start doing. That's a pattern that I started very young, and that, multiple, like just hundreds, thousands of experiences throughout my life have reinforced this pattern of behavior as being successful in terms of your brain wants to keep you safe, not comfortable. And that one also is really at the heart of self-sabotage. I think that that's like, if you want to like sort of condense it down to a really concise, understandable sound point, that's it.
One of the things I was thinking about as you said this, like you said, if you can think about the first time that this was successful, quote unquote, successful for you, and you gathered it along the way, which is absolutely what we do. Like in childhood, most often maladaptive coping skills are kind of what we gather. And then, adulthood, and especially when you hit DBT, if those of you listening subscribe to the kind of concept that DBT is the most successful modality for you, which I name it as the second most successful modality for me, whereas the first is medication. Um, I was thinking, okay, when did I capture or put this in my pocket? And there was two things that stood out for me. One, self-sabotage being cheating in school. And I was not going to be able to learn math. It was not going to fucking happen. Undiagnosed ADHD, right? But the self-sabotage and of cheating in school was like setting me up for like social conflict, because like my friends didn't want me cheating off of them or taking their homework and copying it.
Oh.
But that was like what I had to do to get by so that my mom wasn't like furious with me as a school teacher for like coming home with bad grades. So that was there, there is the function of the behavior. But then the second thing I was thinking is like, we can't easily differentiate between attention seeking behavior and self-sabotage, because attention seeking behavior was self-sabotage in the long run, especially socially, right? Of, oh my God, she's so embarrassing. We don't want to invite her to the school dance, so we're all going to say we aren't going, right? But like, that's how we got a need met in the moment of like, someone just fucking look at me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would argue that for you, cheating in school was very successful. It absolutely achieved the goals that you wanted it to, in terms of like that I think the thing too about the self-sabotaging behaviors that we often engage in is like they have all of these fringe effects that we're not thinking about. Like we're so focused on like, okay, I have this very intense emotional need, which is my attachment figure. I can't experience disapproval from my attachment figure, right? Like that is a very, very, life-threatening need as a kid. It has all of these sort of fringe effects. And for me, at least with my self-sabotaging behavior, I noticed that most of those, I was prioritizing my sort of primary attachment relationships at the expense of every other relationship in my life. And that is, I think, in large part, like sort of the borderline that like focus on that it transfers to your romantic partners later on, right? But my self-sabotaging behavior was very much about dumping my whole consciousness into this one relationship and letting all of my friendships fall by the wayside. And that's one reason why I walked away, like I was saying when we were catching up, like I walked away from that social sort of situation with maybe one connection intact, because I was so practiced at really focusing on one or two important people in my life that I just like, yeah, I couldn't really see the other sort of costs. And that is like being able to register that danger is like one of the reasons why we continue on with the self-sabotaging, because we're so flooded by the immediate sort of survival need that we think we're fulfilling, that yeah, it feels like it's like wearing blinders, and so much of my borderline symptoms if I could just zoom out and get like a little bit of perspective, like a wider, shot at it. But again, like our brains get like flooded and focus on the most immediate, the most intense, like um that's just kind of how that goes. And so like as an adult, there's like this added layer of like shame and frustration of like, okay, this should be a very intentional thing. This feels like a decision I'm making, when like it's just really not, like people have free will, but like we also don't.
Well, yeah, borderline absolutely stands in the way of that, right? Because it like you said, it floods over that like wise mind, the kind of fuck, what is the like where does the frontal lobe exist? I forget the
The
parasympathetic
prefrontal
cortex,
cortex.
prefront, thank you, that one. But yeah, it all comes back to safety, right? And it all comes back to in childhood that primary like attachment figure. So in school, I could cheat, but at home, I would do anything to make it appear as if I wasn't cheating or something like that. And I was thinking about this unique dynamic of um like my mom was my primary attachment figure, and my parents have that very classic, I'm doing the like fingers crossed on both hands thing, this like there is not one without the other. I mean, my mom is the emotional kind of like pillar in the marriage between my parents, but like you don't fuck with my mom unless you want to deal with my dad. And my dad wasn't emotionally present in my life unless I was being reprimanded for the way in which I fucked with my mom. And so it was like always attempting to manage this like attachment with my mom, but rather like try to make it seem like I was doing or being good enough in school so that she wasn't upset with me. But undiagnosed ADHD, it's like, well, you can't do that. So then at some point, the self-sabotage became, um, well, I'm never going to meet up. I'm never going to meet this standard anyways. So, like, fuck it. Like, I'm always going to get grounded. You guys are always going to take my shit away from me. I'm always going to be too sexual, too loud, too defiant, too whatever. And it feels safe for me to just deal with the consequences now of being afraid of you.
And that is a much more sort of classic idea of what we think of when we think of self-sabotage, right? Is like, well, if you're just going to think this about me anyway, then it doesn't, like, I'm not going to bother to be anything else. Yeah, and that's why I think that self-sabotage like feels like such an adult behavior, that it's really hard for people to track that line from childhood through, and then it changes flavors a little bit once you get to, I'd say I was maybe about like 12 or 13 by the time I reached that point, adolescence, puberty. Um, and then I mean, I was there, basically there, all through my 20s. Like that was basically my, obviously like once I left school and graduated college, I had more adult responsibilities. But I mean, like my life, it's so weird. It's like you do this weird flip where it's like your life, you started the behavior to like cope with your life, but as the behavior becomes more solidified in your sort of like that neural pathway of like, oh, this hits, this gets results, you start to conform your life to adhere and accommodate your self-sabotage. So it's like it mirrors addiction in a lot of ways, and I think that's one reason why they often also go hand in hand so well. Is like it starts off as this thing that you do to blend in, or you're drinking because it helps grease the social wheels, or what, we all have our reasons. um and then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you realize like, I mentally can't make it through my day unless I know that I have this at the end of the day or whatever, however your pattern has emerged.
Or you have it at lunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to make sure that that comment is not while I was not drinking while I was providing therapy. I
Yes.
need to say that.
No, same.
Back in
Yeah.
the
I
day
get it.
while I was providing case management, yes. But that was many, many, many years ago. I love the comparison to addiction, right? Because you do get addicted to attempting to people please, and then you get addicted to fucking self-sabotage because it's all you can do. And then in adulthood, you're just fucking addicted, right? I mean, like I could have not had borderline and I was going to be an addict, right? But that the borderline and ADHD um intersection with addiction then just makes it fucking
That's a 1-2 punch. I
woo
mean, nobody comes out of that unscathed. Yeah.
woo yeah it's really wild. um it's interesting too because I think self-sabotage can look like to people in fact really beautiful and like wise decisions, like my marriage to my ex-wife on the outside. I mean, my ex-wife, if we ignore the fact that she's a cop, um, is pretty stable and um she's not an addict and she has family that is present and all of these things. She owns a vehicle, all of these things that on the outside you're like, oh wow, Sarah's like not gonna marry a drug dealer and not gonna like marry an addict and all of these things, like wow, we're so happy for her. But then the self-sabotage there is like I absolutely was setting myself up for a marriage that was emotionally unavailable and physically unavailable because that's what I thought I was supposed to do to make the people in my life feel like Sarah has it together. And I hadn't yet figured out we can have a combination of all of these things.
Totally. Totally. I think that that's a really excellent point to bring up because that is more so the flavor that my self sabotage has taken on in recent years now that I'm sort of in my like late 20s and early 30s. And it's not to say that I wasn't doing it before, but that's just sort of the piece of it I've been working with most recently is this like needing to acknowledge that like again, yeah, self-sabotage, it's not this like overt thing that I choose to do. It's literally who I do and do not feel attracted to, so it's like again, and I think especially in the States, especially in like a real individualistic sort of atomized culture like we really think that we are sort of the masters of ourselves and we are these sovereign beings, and that our feelings are totally sort of discrete. It's this response that I am giving to this thing that's just happened to me. And like our behavior is so woven up in our past experiences, not in a deterministic way, but in like just in that like your feelings are not necessarily all your own. I know that that might like raise some hackles and like not some people might really not like the way that feels, which I totally get. But like
Well, like, let's just say
mm,
though, like the feelings are not your own. We've talked about like trauma literally begins like prior to conception, right? Like, and at conception. And I mean, I've said this before, like, I can't unweave what is my trauma versus what is my mother's trauma, especially coming from this like Jesus, fundamentalist, Mormon, um, addicted, uh, mentally ill, all of this suicide, like, and all of this is happening while I'm developing. So, like, I don't fucking know what's mine and what's hers, right? And that does absolutely influence my behavior. A good example of this is like it influences my bias. Like, it influences my bias towards like the Mormon church. And I didn't have a chance to see the Mormon church as like a somewhat positive pillar in the community until I had a fucking professor in graduate school say, in an aging elder adults class in graduate school say, I have never seen a more supported aging person than the person that is connected to the Mormon church. And I was like, holy shit, that's so true. Like there is a positive there.
Assuming you don't get excommunicated. Yes, you just got to manage that one.
Well, and that's the thing is like, does that outweigh the negatives and the harm that is done? Not from my perspective, but I had never been able to identify that there was a potential positive.
No, I think that's amazing. Yeah, I think it's important to because we can that is like a way in which culturally we get locked into this all or nothing black and white type of thinking, you know. And yeah, I don't think that that's helpful. I mean, if they're pathologizing that on an individual level in borderlines, like why would you not pathologize that then on a larger cultural level? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and okay, so going back, you were saying like our feelings and our what I interjected to say was our trauma like influences our behavior and we're not always like sovereign beings in terms of like our feelings aren't always our own. Tell me more about kind of what you were saying there and thinking there.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. In this way of again, and I don't want to say that we're just like these robots who, you know, have, you know, like we have you put in XYZ experience and you get out, you know, whatever trauma, because obviously we know from the borderline community that's definitely not the way that works. Um, but no, it's in this way of like again, like you have certain sort of choices available to you in any given situation in terms of just like what the objective physical you know limitations of the reality are but like the way you feel about those options is not it's not objective. It's highly subjective, and you know every person put in that situation is going to choose a different thing, and part of that is due to stuff like temperament, sure, um, absolutely. But we'll do like a metaphor within a metaphor. It's our brains are a little bit like economics. Economics is basically projections based on past data, right? They take the data points and they sort of project how it's going to look. This is a very basic sort of explanation of, you know, what economics looks like. Our brains are kind of the same, you know, and so we get a blind spot when it comes to thinking of these alternative realities of like, oh, maybe there are like maybe people aren't these total rubes and fools just for falling for the church. Maybe there's very real community, very real sort of resources that they are needing access to, you know? So it helps to really sort of flesh people out and make them more human. And that is sort of what I mean is like we have all of these connections in our lives and they lead us to make certain decisions.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yes, yeah.
This is a big one from a self-sabotage perspective, and I was like, I have to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see sex and sexuality influenced by self-sabotage? Because is this not the classic borderline? I mean, and I say that like I am a classic borderline from hell. So like we all know how many people I've had sex with. The number is unknown. So what are your thoughts? Like, how do you see this interwoven?
So this is a really interesting point for me coming from I was very much all throughout my teens and 20s, pretty much the same, you know, definitely gained a reputation for myself, deserved and completely undeserved as well. And that actually gaining that reputation absolutely led me to be more willing to sort of, you know, throw the towel in terms of like, well, fuck it. They already think I'm the class slut anyway, you know? Um, so, and that was true. I mean, it's still true, but I'm going through a phase where I'm pretty effectively sex repulsed. And that has never really happened to me
Oh my
before.
God.
It's weird.
Literally same. It's such
Yeah.
a fucking
It's a
it's an
mind
I
it's a mind trip.
it's an
Yeah.
it's an identity shift, right? Because I had built a lot of my identity around I'm a fucking slut,
Mm,
and that's how I get like love and affection. And uh I don't I don't know when that started to change. I mean, there
yeah.
was like I literally like injured my vagina. So that was a
That'll
big,
do it.
yeah, I mean that literally like I think that was a turning point for me about 2 years ago was like, and I still have this like, sorry for people listening, but like this is a part of sexual health and I'm not gonna like censor myself if you're uncomfortable hearing about there's like a tear right outside of my vagina. And I had to like send photos to this gynecologist. And at this point, I'm probably going to have it like sutured up a bit because it's been like 2 years and I haven't been to the doctor because I'm a piece of shit self-sabotager. But for me, that was like a starting point. Do you know what was yours? Like that repulsion to sex?
That is that's a question. That's a good question that I have been wondering about myself. Also, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's rough. I know you have a lot of other health stuff too. So, just
Yeah,
throw
it's just
one
like
more on the pile.
I know one more thing. Well, it makes sex painful, right? So then like and sex
Absolutely not. Yeah.
and masturbation isn't painful because it's like a different location, but
Completely. Yeah.
then you feel guilty about masturbating but not having sex with your partner. I mean, it's just all a fucking
Yeah, but your
sex is
partner
so complicated.
is cool and understanding, like
My partner is
at least.
amazing. Yes. Okay, anyways,
But
sex
no,
and
but it's
self-sabotage, self-sabotage. Tell
yeah.
me your experience.
Yeah, so that is a really great question. I would say, I mean, this really, because so I was dating a guy in 2021. That was like my last sort of like actual relationship where we had a title and we were really seeing each other and we were making plans for the future. Um, and that went up in flames after like 2 or 3 months, four maybe, I think. So and I just called it quits on but I was still kind of fucking around with people. I had like a situationship or two. For the last year I was seeing somebody who, man, it was, those relationships where it's like just fire and gas, like for your, like their dysfunction just dovetails so neatly with your own, that it's like how the fuck do I get myself out of this one, like, and we went back and forth. I think, like, yeah, I broke up with him for the first time in August, and then a month, like it took us months to break up with each other. It's finally, I'm pretty sure it's done for the time being. But this year, that relationship, I do this thing in healing that really drives me absolutely up the wall, where it's like I have to go through the pattern one last time before I really get like, oh shit, this is not the business. This is not it for me anymore. This does not work. But I have to sit there and like watch myself from, my little inside out command center inside of my head and watch myself do it one more time. So that relationship was a process of just like having my self-sabotaging tendencies laid out to me in gruesome detail, just right in front of my face. I really had to look at my behavior because this guy was like, I know that other relationships were like this in the past, where it was like, Les, what are you doing? This person gives you nothing. This person is not interested in you. This person is using you for your body. The list goes on. Um, and I think that, yeah, I think that just really seeing my behavior for what it was. And so something in my perspective shifted. So that's what I think that, I don't know. I honestly, when I think back on it, like what was it that helped me really see this for what it is? I want to give myself credit and say that it's the work that I've been doing with myself. But I'm a little bothered actually that I can't like fully pinpoint it. It just was one of those times where I kind of turned around and looked at myself and I was like, oh, this is not the way I used to feel about this. And that is not the way I would have. And the thing about healing too that's so messy and frustrating is like I started to do the thing with another guy I met, like after I had this breakup. And I really just had to be like, I don't care if you feel like you look stupid, Leslie. I don't care if you were gunning for things to go in, that direction before, and this is going to confuse this person. You have to be honest about what's going. You have to be honest about the fact that this is your pattern and that you are backtracking because you are trying to change it, and that was effective, thankfully. but yeah, I mean, it really just feels like I just keep on doing it. And then, like, the next time that I do it, it's a little bit more contained and a little bit more easy to understand. And I don't know. My hope is that the behavior winds itself out.
I think it will. I think it will. Um, you said healing is so hard, and I think that the first thing that came to mind is this is ironic, and we're almost out of time, but healing on the other side of making better choices, in my experience, includes less dopamine. And I am having to come to terms with I'm experiencing less dopamine. I'm experiencing more consistency and stability. And I like that. But I don't have the dopamine rush of getting fucked up and enjoying the dance floor and making out with girls in the bathroom. I don't experience the shame of falling over and getting put in the back of an Uber and being like, am I going to throw up and have to pay $300? Or the shame of, oh, I really wouldn't have wanted to fuck that person, but in the moment I got all of the dopamine that I needed from it, right? So like there's less dopamine on this side, but it's safer. It helps establish relationships. And my goal is that in the long run, 10, 20 years, because I am in fact going to live, that there is more dopamine and that's consistent. Um, okay, Leslie, what is one thing, if you had to kind of like encapsulate a statement, a sentence about self-sabotage, what would it be?
This one is not my own. I did get this from, and I wish I could remember the source for it. It was some podcast or interview or something or other I watched a long time ago, but it's really stuck with me. And I hated it when I first heard it. Um, Having is indicative of wanting. Having is indicative of wanting. Which is not to gaslight myself about, oh, everything in your life is your own fault and you're the arbiter of your own destiny, complete, because I don't believe in that worldview. But having is indicative of wanting. One of the most powerful tools in my belt for dealing with self-sabotage is looking at what I have in my life. And then, yeah, again, just like looking at like, okay, why do I want this? Why am I keeping this? Why has this not gone extinct? What do I want about this? And not shaming myself for that, which is tough. And then going from there to, okay, so that's why I want that, or that's why I used to want that. What do I want now? And how can I get there? And how does this really get in the way of that? So yeah, I think having is indicative of wanting is a really powerful tool for self-sabotage.
I love that. I love that. Okay, I am so excited. My hope is that Leslie is going to come back as a guest co-host. Fabulous. We just got the
I would
thumbs
love.
up. This was such a fun discussion, and I think our next discussion, and perhaps we'll do more on more of kind of mini series of this kind of thing with Leslie, but our next discussion is going to be on stop loving who you want them to be. Such a hard one and good one and important one for those of us with borderline. Leslie, thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate you.
I so appreciate you, Sarah. It's always amazing. We'll do this again sometime soon.
Yes. Thank you for tuning in to the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your content. That's super helpful for me in finding additional folks who want to listen to the show, want to feel seen, family members, partners who want to understand. You can also follow along at Bold Beautiful Borderline
or at Borderline from Hell on Instagram.
For the blog and a more extensive list of resources, go to boldbeautifulborderline.com. There you can also request to be a guest on the show, or you can do my favorite thing and leave a voicemail to be played at one of our future episodes. All of this information can be seen below in the show notes. If you'd like to support the show and get exclusive perks, consider becoming a Patreon member. Your support helps me with creating content to destigmatize BPD and all the other wild mental health struggles that I discuss on this podcast. As always, thank you so much for guests and listeners alike. I love you. Until next time, keep living and seeking joy. Information in this podcast is not medical advice, but rather experience from individuals living with mental illnesses. If you want to try a treatment that you heard about, please consult your treatment team. The music in this podcast was created by a longtime friend of mine, Corey Evans from the Evergreen Band. You can find him on Instagram at _Evergreen Band. Cover art was created by my husband, Talon Abbott. Their information is in the show notes. There is no producer for this show. It's all me.